the chosen. Be brave, Professor. Be brave like my mother.
How do you feel?
Excellent. Really excellent.
Hey everyone, welcome to Hogwarts, a podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hogwarts, a podcast. We are covering Chapter 13, The Secret Riddle. Julie is with us today.
Hey everybody!
And it's an interesting, very isolated episode that we get. It's essentially just an Albus lesson with Harry, and we just dive into a memory. Before we get into the chapter, I have a couple of shout-outs. Daniel on X, I'm going to try to call it X, but Twitter, on our Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 9, The Half-Blood Prince, he says, I agree with Snape would get mad either way. At the same time, Harry would still have a snarky reply. And he gives an example here. Snape says, you clearly whispered that spell. Harry, want to give it another go then? And then he gives a laughing and goofy emojis at the end of his comment. And then he says, this has always been my favorite chapter in the series. That's interesting. The Half-Blood Prince chapter as the favorite chapter in the series? That's an interesting take. Thank you, Daniel, for the comment. That comment is in regards to when that's basically Snape's first Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson where he's trying to teach them nonverbal spells. And I think I was trying to say, or the question I had posed was, if Harry used the shield charm non-verbally, would Snape still be mad at getting pushed back into his desk?
Yes.
Fair enough. I don't disagree with that. I'm just posing the question. But yeah, Daniel seems to agree with you on Twitter. So, second,
it's nice to be agreed with for once.
We're starting out this episode great. We're in agreement. Jenny Conway, also on Twitter /X, regarding our poll about whether Hermione was flirting when she said how scary Buckbeak is. Jenny goes, I had never thought of Hermione flirting at that point, but it does make some sense in some ways. I feel like it's a mix between the two, though. Julie, what are your thoughts on Hermione potentially flirting there?
I don't know. I guess I could see it either way. I don't know.
I think that poll on Twitter, it's pretty decidedly against Hermione flirting.
Yeah, like,
there.
I could see why, like, you would see it as Hermione flirting, but at the same time, like, I don't know. I never read that much into it.
I never even thought that was even a thing when I read that. So.
Then again, I feel like Hermione would kind of be a, like, awkward flirter.
Anyway, let's dive into this Albus lesson here. We get a little bit of them catching up beforehand, and then we get actually two memories in this, which is kind of interesting. We get a memory from, I'm going to try to pronounce this first name, Caraticus? Sure. Burke. He's the co-founder of Borgin & Burke's in Diagon Alley, so he's the first memory. The second memory is Albus himself. Gives a self-recollection. And then we get a little post-memory chat at the end. So, in this little catch-up session, obviously Harry's first question, as it should be, is about Katie Bell. Like, hey, have you heard anything about Katie? How is Katie Bell doing after that incident coming back from Hogsmeade? Dumbledore goes into an explanation about, like, Katie's really lucky. She very easily could have died if just, like, a bit of it touched her.
Yeah, it was like a hole in her glove was the only reason that she actually touched it. But if it was even slightly bigger of a hole, no more Katie.
Yeah, that's a crazy, powerful object.
Yeah.
That's super scary. And Dumbledore also continues that Snape prevented a rapid spread of the curse, which then Harry immediately questions Snape's involvement. Like, why wasn't she sent immediately to Madame Pomfrey? Why Snape?
Yeah, well, and I think it's interesting because Dumbledore points out that Snape has an extensive knowledge of the dark arts, which I thought was, like, an interesting, like, I get that it's a cursed object, but it's interesting to me that, like, that was the first thought instead of being, like, he understands, like, the dark arts and he makes, like, really complicated potions. Like, we've seen in the past Snape making these, like, very complex potions to, like, help those. I mean, even if you go back to Chamber of Secrets when they were trying to wake up the petrified students, like, it was Snape that brewed that potion, not Madame Pomfrey, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, it was like a combo
Yeah.
effort between, like, Sprout, Snape, and Pomfrey.
Yeah, so it's not like it's, you know, Madame Pomfrey can cure... I mean, like, think about, like, a school nurse, for example. Like, you know, if
Right.
you slice your leg open, you're not going to go to the school nurse. You might go to someone who's, like, an EMT on the side or something. I don't know.
Might go to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, like, me and the school nurse have a very good relationship where she deals with, like, general medical stuff. Like, if you're sick, go to her.
Yeah.
If you have an orthopedic injury, like you sprained your ankle or you might have jammed your finger, then come to me. So it's like that, like, understanding
Yeah,
of,
it's
like...
the general knowledge and the specialized knowledge.
They also get into Mundungus going underground after running into Harry with all of his stolen goods. Just the news that someone is stealing from the Black household upsets Phineas in his portrait, and he angrily stumps out of his portrait.
Phineas is, like, the funniest. I mean, not that there was a ton of, like, laughter in this chapter, but Phineas was, like, the funniest thing to me because it's, like, he just keeps talking about Harry's, like, insubordination and, like, gets mad about people stealing from the House of Black and storms off. And, like, I don't know, picturing it, I'm just cracking up. But it's also interesting when you think about Harry and Dumbledore having this open conversation in front of all the portraits. Like, is there some type of spell on the portraits that prevent them from spilling secrets outside of the headmaster's office?
Yeah.
Because most of them have at least one other portrait location. So if you think about it, like, Dumbledore's sitting here telling Harry, like, hey, let's jump into some memories. Let's talk about it afterwards.
Yep.
And it's like, how many former headmasters and headmistresses are sitting there listening to this that could easily just go, hey, I have another portrait in Malfoy Manor. Peace out, guys.
Right. Yeah, no, I think the portraits in the headmaster's office specifically are bound to be loyal to the headmaster, whoever that headmaster is. So I feel like there is some level of secrecy attached to it, whereas maybe some of their other portraits, not so much. So if you, like, for example, if you have a portrait in St. Mungo's, you can get that information back because they're not necessarily bound to St. Mungo's secrecy.
Yeah.
Even though they should be, because that's medical information, so that should be a
Does
thing.
HIPAA exist?
Apparently not. But you get my point.
Yeah.
Harry also does question Albus about Draco, and Albus dismisses it so smoothly. Just like, yeah, I'm looking into all possible leads. Thanks. Cool. And now what we're here to do.
Pat on the head.
Yep. Good job, Harry. Thanks for the suggestion. I'll look into that. We get into our first memory, which, again, is Mr. Burke. I'm not going to pronounce the first name again. Mr. Burke from Borgin Burkes and Diagon Alley. The memory is essentially Voldy's mother, Merope, selling Slytherin's locket for 10 galleons, which Harry obviously notes is like, he got a priceless heirloom from one of the most famous wizards that we know for 10 galleons.
Well, I mean, like, yes, that is an extremely low amount for what he's getting, but, like, also, is anyone surprised?
That's essentially, literally your response right there is Albus's response.
Yeah, like, I mean, is there anything that we've learned about Borgin and Burke's, like, shop that makes us think, like, these are fine, upstanding citizens
Right.
that are going to give you exactly what your item is worth?
I just get, like, that... First of all, I don't know if any of you have tried to resell an item of some sort. Even, like, a video game. Let's take a video game. You buy a video game from GameStop, let's say. And you play that video game for, like, a week. And then you try to resell it at GameStop.
They're like, you can have $1.
For real. They're like $5 or less on a game you just bought $70 on. And then they will get that $5 game that they just purchased
And they'll
from you.
sell it for $35.
30. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how this goes.
Well, that's kind of how the whole business works. Like, if
Yeah.
he paid her for what it's worth, he then has to find a buyer that not only pays what he paid, but still makes him a profit.
Right.
So, like, I don't find that super shocking.
10 galleons is a low, low number.
I mean,
that's a That's a low number.
But think about it. It's like if you find out that someone is selling, like, I don't know, what would be something that would go for a lot of money? An autographed Taylor Swift guitar, because I was listening to Taylor Swift on my drive here.
Fair enough.
If you had an autographed Taylor Swift guitar and someone was like, I'll sell it to you for $10 and I can prove that it's authentic, would you go, oh man, but you could sell this for $30,000? No, you'd go, $10 sounds great, thanks, have a great life.
What do you think first, do you think he even resells this locket, or do you think he's like, oh wait, this is Slytherin's, I'm keeping this in like a back room somewhere?
I'm sure it's kept in a back room because it's not like you'd want to advertise it, like, and be like, hey, we have a priceless artifact.
Right.
But like, I'm sure he has a list of clients that can give him big
This is
money
over
for it.
1,000 galleons.
Yeah.
Like easily over 1,000 galleons.
Yeah. I also just kind of like laughing at the fact that Dumbledore retrieved this memory, and I'm just trying to imagine Dumbledore going to get this memory, like, hey, can I just pick your brain a little bit? So, like Dumbledore walking into like Nocturne Alley.
Yeah, I'm sure he created quite the presence just in general. And then you're like, why is Dumbledore coming to ask me? And why is he asking about this random like peasant girl?
Why would you want to help him too? Like,
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So Dumbledore is noting that she's in rough shape. The idea of her selling it for 10 galleons is like, she needs food. She needs water. She needs to just basics to survive. Mm-hmm. And Harry's like, well, she's a witch. Can't she figure out some way to get food and water and necessary living supplies? And Dumbledore hypothesizes that she potentially stopped using magic after her husband left her. And kind of hints towards the idea, not hints towards, he specifically says, unrequited love and attendant despair can sap someone of their actual magical abilities.
I think that makes total sense because I believe it was Neville that in Sorcerer's Stone, Philosopher's Stone, they say that when he wasn't showing any magical abilities, like his uncle or something tried to like push him off the roof or something.
Throw him out a window or something like that. Yeah,
to like make his magic like awaken. So it makes sense if something that traumatized could awaken your magic, that something equally or more traumatizing could essentially zap you of it.
How does Harry have any magical ability in the first book after living so long with the Dursleys?
Well, the whole thing was just traumatizing, so no wonder.
That's brutal. But yes, Neville, I think, is a good point of just being but being like emotionally and mentally abused a little bit in the why aren't you producing great magic like your parents and your grandparents and all of this lineage that you have. And the more you hear that, the less apt you are to actually do anything.
Yeah.
You just kind of get buried under the weight of it. And this, she used magic to ensnare Tom Riddle. And I think she's almost rebelling against that of being like, if this costs me my only like joy, then maybe I should just get rid of it. Mm-hmm. Where Merope goes after this encounter with Burke. And it essentially says Merope ends up leaving to go to an orphanage and essentially births Voldemort, births Tom Riddle, Tom Marvolo Riddle, and she says, that's the name that I want, Tom Marvolo Riddle. And literally those are essentially almost the only 3 words she says before she herself passes away. And Harry asks the question, Merope wouldn't live for her son, which Albus responds to, do you feel sorry for Voldemort? And I ask you the question, Julie. Do you feel sorry for Voldemort?
I mean, yeah, who wouldn't? But here's my thing. Here's the issue that I take with it. Is the way that it's framed up is that Merope just kind of like gave birth and then left. But that's not what actually happened. Jumping ahead like a little tiny bit, we see that she dies from childbirth complications. I think they say it's like within an hour of Tom being born that she dies. And that wasn't, I mean, there is something to be said for you need to have the like will to live if you're going to like push through something. But at the same time, it's like, you don't know what those complications are. She could have just died. And Harry sitting there and being like, wow, she couldn't even live for her son. And it's like, I mean, it wasn't necessarily like her choice. She wasn't at a hospital to give birth. She wasn't at around people who knew magic.
Dumbledore goes on to say, Merope Riddle chose death in spite of a son who needed her, but do not judge her too harshly, Harry. She was greatly weakened by long suffering, and she never had your mother's courage.
Like, and that bothers me. Like, she never had your mother's courage. First of all, like, as a mother myself, like, sitting there and saying, like, your mother's courage, like, the most obvious thing that Dumbledore's pointing to is Lily dying to protect Harry. But, like, what mother wouldn't?
Well, that's the whole argument right here, is that Merope is not
what
fighting.
Mother wouldn't, like, take the bullet, so to speak, for their kid?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, her dying from childbirth complications isn't necessarily, like, taking a bullet, but she still made sure that when she did give birth, she was somewhere where her kid could be taken care of afterwards. It's not like she was like, well, we'll just see what happens, and if he's born in a back alley, I'll leave him there. Like, there is some level of love for her son. There just wasn't the, I don't know, like, love for her life anymore after everything that happened with the love potion and Tom Riddle Sr.
Her extraordinarily abusive upbringing.
Yeah. And so it's like, with all of that just constantly, like, beating her down, I'm not saying that, like, her being like, all right, like, I'm not fighting for this anymore makes sense, but, like, I think that both Harry and Dumbledore are being, like, a little harsh to the reality of she could have just died from complications. They're, like, giving childbirth, even in, like, today's day and age with modern medicine, is extremely, like, dangerous and risky. And, like, thanks to modern medicine, like, the mortality rate's not as high, but, like, I don't know. It rubbed me the wrong way, but...
Okay, I have a lot to go on what you just said there. I think, just to your very last point, because it's fresh in my head right now, I think that might be a window into inherent Wizarding World bias, because maybe in the Wizarding World, childbirth-related fatalities are not as common because magic plays a role in it. Yeah. So it's maybe a safer process because they have whatever potion or whatever, like, healing
They wave the wand and the baby comes out. There's no labor.
Sure. If only that was a thing. I don't think that's a thing. But so maybe that's a safer process. So maybe they're indignant inherently towards the, like, well, she kind of chose this fate instead of going somewhere.
It's not like Harry would know that, though.
Dumbledore would. Well, to your point, which is Dumbledore, I think, tries to put some context so Harry doesn't judge her too harshly. He literally says, don't judge her too harshly. But then I agree with you in that...
Whoa, I'm on a roll today!
I know. I agree with you that his finish to this is inappropriate, where she never had the courage that Lily had. That's inappropriate.
Yeah, and, like, I mean, Dumbledore could be talking on, like, the greater whole of, like, Lily as a person, not just Lily as a mother. Two
completely different people, though.
But when you're talking specifically in don't judge Tom Riddle's mother, she doesn't have the courage of your mother. Like, you're specifically calling out her actions as a mother, and to me, like, that's a low blow from Dumbledore to be like, hey, she died in childbirth. She didn't have the courage your mom had. Like,
nope. I think that was inappropriate because I think Lily and Merope had two very different upbringings. Mm-hmm. So not to say Lily had any specific, like, wondrous upbringing, but we know where Merope came from, which was hell on earth. Mm-hmm. It was an atrocious upbringing where she was abused every day, almost every moment of every day. She didn't value her life very much, if at all.
Yeah. And I think it says a lot that she actually showed up at the orphanage instead of just going like, wow, my husband left me. I have this terrible life. Like, you know what? I'm over it. Like, she actually made sure that her kid would be, I mean, like, terribly cared for, but cared for.
Yeah. I would be very remiss if I didn't bring up this cross fandom mention, because this moment in the Star Wars fandom caused a lot of indignant reactions, because when, spoilers for Star Wars if you haven't seen that saga at all, but when Luke and Leia are born, Padme dies on birth, even though the med droid was like, she's perfectly fine, she's perfectly healthy, but she's dying. And the ultimate, Anakin just turned to the dark side. Mm-hmm. She doesn't even know who he is anymore. The father has essentially left her. And the take is that she died of just sadness, that she was so, like, distraught over this, she just couldn't. And then it's the same argument. Yeah. She's not living for Luke and Leia. She's just, like, calling it a day. It's similar, but not, because Padme had a different upbringing than Marop did, too. But same ultimate end result of choosing not to live for your children, and you're just like, I can't live this life anymore. Yeah. So I get Harry's indignation about it, but at the same time, I think you really have to look at the individual circumstances. Yeah, and I feel like it's just very clouded by it's Voldemort's mom at the end of the day. I don't know that Marop was in any condition emotionally, mentally, at all to actually take care of a child at that point. So to your point, having the child somewhere where they could potentially at least care for the child might actually be responsible. Well, and at an orphanage versus like a hospital, you would probably have less overhead. The orphanage, you could probably have the baby leave, no one asks you questions. Yeah. If you show up at like an emergency room or something, they're going to want your name, they're going to want your information, and if you just peace out, the cops are coming for you. Well, happy belated Mother's Day to all our mothers, both on the podcast and now listening. Whew, that was I don't think we can count that as a Mother's Day gift, Dan. We gotta do better. No? Okay. I don't like that one. Fair enough. Well, unfortunately, our second memory is going to that orphanage. So, second memory is Albus's, which is, Julie, did you know that his memory is so rich in detail and satisfyingly accurate? I rolled my eyes so hard when he said that. I was like, listen, I'm sure it is. You seem like a very detail-oriented person, but like, oof. It's a not so humble brag, Julie. Right? Especially from Dumbledore. Dumbledore is usually like, oh, did I save the entire world? No, I was just standing here, guys. You all did the hard work. Okay. Okay, Albus. Okay. All right. Calm yourself down. And then we get into this memory. And I just want to point out that he's wearing a flamboyant cut suit of plum velvet. We get the Jude Law version of Dumbledore. You know what, Dan? Is it, though? Dan, you know what? We'll stick it at the Jude Law version, and that can be the Mother's Day gift that we have for our mothers. I'll take that one. A Jude Law Dumbledore. Jude Law can definitely rock like a Tom Ford cut, like plum suit. He definitely can. I don't think this is it though, because people reacted to Jude Law's Dumbledore as like, oh, he looks great. People reacting in this chapter to Dumbledore are like, you look kind of weird. You look a little off. Like, what's the deal? So I don't know if it was. I'm taking it as the Mother's Day gift, Dan. Okay, let's just fine. Julie will. Happy Mother's Day, everyone. Julie will imagine. Jude Law, Dumbledore. Anyway, so this memory is Albus coming to offer Tom Riddle a spot at Hogwarts, and he speaks with Mrs. Cole, who is the matron of this orphanage. He's giving major Mrs. Hannigan vibes for all of our musical fans. She is a little disbelieving about this amazing opportunity for what appears to be a quite troubled kid. And Albus does a little bit of quick magic. I'm thinking a little bit of Confundus. I don't know, because it says that when he pulled out his wand, that he handed her a sheet of blank paper. Right.
And then she's like, oh yeah, everything seems to be in order. So my thought was that he enchanted the paper to do some type of like, this paper will show you whatever you need.
I took it, so I thought, I actually read this twice. My first thought on the first initial read was exactly that. Like, oh, that's definitely what he did. And then I was like, well, what if I'm misinterpreting the spell? And I read it back, and I'm like, I think he just handed her a blank piece of paper and then just did a little, like, confusion, like, let's make this reality kind of thing.
Yeah, but that seems a little...
intrusive and aggressive?
It seems a little, well...
Dark? All of the above?
I think that, from what we know, that seems a little harsh from Dumbledore. It seems a little aggressive. Dumbledore's not really a, like...
This is the same Dumbledore that approved of Kingsley confunding or imperiousing a student to give a false narrative on the DA classes. So I think, I'm just saying, he does things for the greater good sometimes, Julie.
Yeah. Okay, but we're really calling this the greater good?
Oh, good. No. But he bends the rules to whatever he wants.
I'm going enchanted paper.
Fair enough. All right. Let us know whether it's enchanted paper or enchanted person. Either way, he deceives Mrs. Cole. Mm-hmm. And she starts spilling over some amazing, I think, what was it, gin that just appeared?
Yeah, the gin.
She drinks the gin freely and starts spilling all of these details and secrets about
after confirming that there is nothing she can say that will make him revoke the space at the school.
She did somehow, I don't know whether she briefly broke Albus's whatever enchantment or the alcohol that she was consuming, but she sobered up for just a second to be like, we're good, right? Like, I can't screw this up. Okay. So she reveals that there have been some incidents with Tom and some other students. She mentions that Billy Stubbs's rabbit hung itself from the rafters, and Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop were never quite right after an outing in the cave.
But there's no actual connection to Tom Riddle other than, like, there was a disagreement with Billy and Tom Riddle, but there was no way to prove that Tom did anything to any of them. The thing that I find interesting is J.K. Rowling actually taking, like, some real life stuff and mixing it into the book, because a lot of times, hello, my fellow Criminal Minds fans, a lot of, like, serial killers typically start out when they're children by torturing animals. So I think it's an interesting aspect that she threw in there that Voldemort didn't do anything to Billy. He instead hung the rabbit. And so it's an interesting, like, little tidbit to throw in there instead of just, like, and Billy lost a finger and we don't know how. Mm-hmm. I am really intrigued to know what happened in the cave.
I don't know if I want to know, honestly.
It's so ominous that I just, like...
These details are really dark. Like, this takes a very dark turn very quickly. And you're like, did she just say the rabbit hung itself? That would be... If you're in a building full of children, and you, like, walk to breakfast one day and you see a rabbit just hanging from the rafter, that would scar everybody. Like, you'd get children screaming. It would be a terrible experience for everyone. Like, that's dark. Yeah. And like you said, it is, I don't want to call it, like, a gateway for serial killer, but it essentially is.
But it's typically one of those that, like, when they find out that you've been abusing animals, that
it's a sociopathic tendency. You don't have empathy for living creatures. It's upsetting, and it should kind of be a little bit of a hint to Albus of, like, hey, there might be something wrong with this kid. Might need to look into that. But then we get a tiny Voldy. We get introduced
tiny Voldy.
Voldy in miniature. Which, honestly, is Tom Riddle Sr. in miniature, because he looks much like his father, like Merope had wished on her dying... her dying wish was for him to look like his father, not her. And we get some interesting personality traits from Tom Riddle in this meeting with Albus. He comes off, at least to me, as paranoid, aggressive, greedy, just plain disrespectful. I think those are 4 fairly reasonable words to come up with to describe his general demeanor in this encounter.
Well, it's like he constantly brings up that he thinks that Dumbledore is actually a doctor from an asylum, which, I mean, to be fair, the way that Dumbledore is presenting things, it does kind of sound like he's like, please come on, we have a nice white coat for you that will enhance your magical ability.
Well, and from what this kid has apparently done, it's a fairly reasonable assumption to make of like, oh, you're definitely coming to take me away. Which, okay, let's say that does happen. As like, if you lock up Voldy in some sort of asylum, keep in mind this is probably like what 1940 something.
Yeah.
So asylums and mental institutions are not what they are in 2024.
Yeah.
They were harsher and had many different types of treatment that would not fly today.
That's one way to put it.
Do you think Voldy would be contained there? Or do you think at some point this just makes everything worse if he were to go to an asylum in this age at that time?
You know, that's actually a really good question, because the one thing that I kept wondering while like rereading this was what would have happened if Voldemort never went to Hogwarts? If Dumbledore had seen this and was like, oh, absolutely not, this is not happening. Just kidding, have a nice life, goodbye. Because if he had never learned about the wizarding world, he would have never learned how to harness his magic. He would have never learned the difference between purebloods and muggles. He would have never learned his lineage. And I feel like there's a lot of things that just never would have happened. Do I think he still would have been like a terrible person and probably not contained in an asylum? Yes. I think that he still would have, you know, done terrible things, potentially ended up in like an asylum, but like with how much power he was already showing, I think he could have gotten out, but without actually knowing what he was doing. I don't know. I don't think he would have caused as much destruction and disaster.
Yeah, he Dumbledore finally like tells him like, no, you're not crazy. Well, debatable, but you're magical. You're a wizard, and Riddle accepts this fairly quickly, which Harry notes. He's like, oh man, he accepted that real quick.
Yeah.
And when he accepts that he's a wizard, it's one of the best quotes, I think. Maybe in this, it's definitely one of the best quotes in this book. Might be one of the top quotes in the series. And I love how they did it in the movie, because it is creepy in the movie.
Yep.
I will try to do my best with this quote. But he says, Tom Riddle goes, I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want them to do without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me. I can make them hurt if I want to. Okay. That's a quote from a child.
And then to even continue it though is after Dumbledore says you're a wizard, which again, when you think about the time that this happened, like I almost kind of understand why like Tom would be so like, yep, that tracks. Is like, think about it. If we're talking like 1930s, like I get that in the, it would have been the 90s that Harry was told he's a wizard.
Yes.
In the 90s, if you're told like, you're a wizard, they'd be like, what? But like in the 30s, like no one's going to make a joke like that and be like, oh, you're a wizard. Ha, gotcha. In one aspect, I do understand why it would be like more believable for him. But the part that gets me is after Dumbledore says you're a wizard, it says Riddle lifted his head. His face was transfigured. There was a wild happiness upon it, yet for some reason it did not make him better looking. On the contrary, his finely carved features seemed somehow rougher, his expression almost bestial.
Here's my thing about Albus here. Is you're clearly recognizing that there are some warning signs. just in his demeanor, how he's acting towards you, how he's clearly treated his peers, those of the same age. Here, but and I get, this might be the first time you've encountered a child like this. Okay. Going forward, though, over the decades that you're the headmaster at Hogwarts, by sheer odds, there are going to be other kids like this who you come into contact with.
Yeah.
Who are a little like, ooh, these troubles...
You're gonna be a little power trippy, huh?
Yeah, or like, oh, I don't know if you're good with magic. You know, we might have to, like, watch you a little bit closer, or put you in a different type of class, or like, how can we do this differently?
All I keep thinking is how many times in Dumbledore's life could he have prevented Tom Riddle from becoming Voldemort? How many times could that have happened? Because, like, right here alone, it's like, hello, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. Like, come on.
So you invoked Criminal Minds earlier. I'm going to invoke Mindhunter on Netflix, because Mindhunter is a story based on true events where FBI agents created essentially what a serial killer is, and they created that term, and they created a profile of things to look for in a potential serial killer. And part of it was traumatic childhood, issues with parents, you know, things like that. And Tom Riddle checks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, you have to, if you're Albus here, you got to start, like, wondering about this a bit.
Like, I'm sorry, even without knowing, like, that, this kid is literally saying that, like, ooh, I can make people hurt if I want to. Who hears that and is like, yes, we should harness your magic?
So I guess, okay, let me try to frame this in a different way, because we're being harsh on Dumbledore here in very one specific way. So I'm going to try to spin this the other way if I can. Again, I'm going to go back to kind of what we talked about earlier. Wizarding world ignorance towards muggles. Because muggles, I think, would have flagged this as troublesome behavior.
Yeah.
But wizards seem to be like, yes, he's odd, but that's magic. We're all kind of weird.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You're not weird. You're just magical. You're just magical. And they slough it off to the side.
Yeah, but okay, we're talking about
I'm not
this.
Excusing it.
We're talking about this again in spoilers because I have thoughts that relate to spoilery things.
Fair enough. We can move on. To help gain Tom Riddle's trust, Albus demonstrates some of his own magic. Because, honestly, not because Albus felt that out of the warmth of his own heart, because Tom Riddle demanded it of him. And Albus just slightly flicks his wand, and the whole wardrobe goes up in flames, which is alarming enough. But then, after the flames died down, there's a rattling noise coming from the closet. And this is where little Tom Riddle actually was like, oh, no. Like, not the flames, not the whole... I mean, that, as startling as that is, that didn't disconcert him.
He was like, I could light things on fire.
He was like, yeah. Oh, I didn't know that's potential. Okay, cool.
I know what I'm doing tomorrow night.
But the rattling in the closet, that's what unnerves him. And he's like, oh, no. And Dumbledore essentially goes into this little monologue of highlighting Tom's stolen objects that he's taken and warns Tom about expectations and rules at Hogwarts. Like, hey, this isn't tolerated. You can't be doing this. You can't be taking things from kids. You can't be harming other kids. Like, this is disallowed, and you will get into trouble, and you can be sent somewhere that's a heck of a lot harsher than Hogwarts. So there are laws, there are rules, there are all kinds of things. And, you know, this is where I think after the demonstration, this is where Tom's demeanor changes a little bit. He goes from more antagonizing, aggressive to more like, oh, okay. He's clearly a lot better at this than I am. I can't manipulate him. Okay, I'll play ball. I'll sit down and I'll be a little bit more respectful.
I think a little bit is the
key. Little bit.
I think it's such an interesting...
it's a shift. It's a shift in tone.
Well, it's such an interesting, moment, I think, because you start seeing the different facets of Tom Riddle. Like, you see how he can be super charming. You see how he could turn into Voldemort. You see how he could get people onto his side, but quickly turn on them. Because, you know, Dumbledore tells him, you know, if you're going to be if you're accepting your spot at Hogwarts, you'll refer to me as, is it Professor or Sir, right? Yes. That you'll address him as Professor or Sir. Tom starts using Sir. But every time that I read it, I don't picture it as a like, oh, yes, sir. I picture it as the like, yes, sir. And like the like, oh, okay, I'll play your game. But it's like you see the back and forth constantly at this point of the Tom Riddle that charms everyone and can get everyone on his side, and the Tom Riddle that is like, oh, no, no, no. You do not control me. I control me. Because I think that's what you start seeing a lot, like when Albus gets the box of trinkets out of the wardrobe, well, when he like magics the box of trinkets. I don't think that it's Tom was like worried about it. It's he got caught. Like he got figured out. Someone bested him, and he's not used to that, especially with having like the magical abilities. Like he's not used to someone being able to like one up him or beat him. And it's like you see it constantly in the memories and in like Voldemort, that it's like he can't be bested, and if he's bested, like something bad needs to happen and it needs to be fixed. And I think you see a lot of Voldemort's characteristics specifically in this memory coming out. And again, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag.
Yeah. There's a couple other things in this encounter that I think are interesting. One, Tom goes, how can I afford this schooling and all these books and all of these things? I don't have anything. Like, literally what you just got from my closet is literally what I have. That's all that I own. And Dumbledore mentions the existence of financial assistance.
Okay. Do you have to pay tuition to go to Hogwarts? Or is it like public education? Do wizards pay taxes?
That's all of the questions that now pop up. Because how does this even exist? It must. Or do they just take donations?
But also,
is that how Lucius is on the board? Like,
he's on the board of governors because he filled the whole... No, because most of the money would probably be going to muggles. He wouldn't put his money towards that.
Well, the teachers must be paid, so are they paid?
Are they? Or is it just like the school covers your stuff? Or like if McGonagall walks down Diagon Alley, are they like, oh, here's a butterbeer?
Maybe. But I mean, like, Snape has his own place in Spinner's End.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, they don't live at Hogwarts 24/7.
True.
So they must get paid. So I guess...
All right, we have questions.
So is it taxes? Or is it tuition?
Are wizards taxed?
I'm going to assume it's tuition.
Wait, they have to be taxed. They have like a government. How do government officials get paid? They have to be taxed.
They have to be taxed, I suppose.
All right, wizards are taxed.
Because the Ministry of Magic doesn't generate revenue. Do you think they have like a golf outing or something like that? A magical golf outing to pay for everything? I don't know.
Fundraisers.
Anyway, on this idea, Dumbledore says, "Oh, I'll go to Diagon Alley with you. Like, I'll go here with you to get all of your things." And this is where Tom kind of reverts back to his old self and is like, "I don't need you. Like, I figure everything out on my own. I roam around London on my own. Like, I'll figure out Diagon Alley. I'll figure out this Tom bar thing."
I didn't read it like that.
Oh,
I read it as, I don't need someone watching me because I just learned about magic, and I don't need someone looking over my shoulder. Someone who just busted me for having tokens of people that I tormented. Like, I don't need someone to come with me while I'm seeing like all of the ins and outs of this magical world.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that's definitely part of it. Of like, he wants to be alone. I think he feels like he thrives alone.
Which is a point that Dumbledore makes when they're having their like
their
roundup
post chat. Yeah, well, before we get to the post chat, Tom does let something slip at the very end of this encounter, and he says he reveals that he can talk to snakes, and they seem to get the impression that he's trying to throw like an impressive fact out there to make Albus go ooh, and he catches it fairly well. He's like, it's unusual, but it's happened before. Like it's a thing.
Which, okay, so I know that we've talked about this in Chamber of Secrets, obviously, but, like, how rare is parcel tongue?
So
Can you learn parcel tongue? Is it like a language?
The impression that
it?
I got was it specifically passed through Slytherin's line only.
Okay.
That's the impression that I have of it.
Well, see, the only part that, like, makes me question that, though, is I feel like Dumbledore could have ended a lot of things with the Chamber of Secrets if it was specific only to Slytherin's line. I get it if Slytherin's line is who was known for it.
Yeah.
But, like, you're telling me that Dumbledore knew that Tom was the heir of Slytherin, and then when the heir of Slytherin opened the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago, he was like... So, like, I would assume that there has to be multiple people, and it's just Slytherin was well known for it, but... So does that mean that it's just, like, a genetic ability?
How many red flags did you count up in this?
God, right?
There's a lot. And
It makes me angry.
I love how this post-memory chat starts off with, of the quote, "Did I know I just met the most dangerous dark wizard of all time? No."
That's what I have to say. But we can talk about that more in spoilers, because a lot of what I have to say that makes me angry about Dumbledore in this moment is spoilery.
This really isn't a great Dumbledore
and I feel like
chapter.
you know where I'm going with it, but...
I feel like this memory that's so rich in detail and satisfyingly accurate is not in Dumbledore's favor, but that's okay.
It's all Dumbledore's fault. That's what we're rounding up to.
He just keeps continuing because he's like, cruelty, secrecy, and domination were worrisome. You think? You think that's a problem?
I mean, maybe.
Okay. All right. He also had an innate hatred for being ordinary. The idea that his name was as mundane as Tom. One, he's named for his father that he knows, and his father left.
Yeah.
And two, he probably runs into a lot of people named Tom, and he's like, I have the name of someone else specifically, and now a lot of people that I'm meeting also have that name. This is stupid. I want to be unique.
Yeah, well, and it's like he also has these abilities, but does he have a hatred for the ordinary and common because he's in an orphanage where it's like everyone's ordinary and he happens to have these like abilities and he has this, I don't know, arrogance about him that he's better than it? And does that arrogance come from just having the abilities in a Muggle orphanage? Or is it from having these abilities and the fact that he was conceived under the influence of a love potion? These are the questions that haunt me.
Tom, they continue this rundown of red flags about Tom, little Voldy, and they say he's friendless by choice, by design. Like, it's intended. It's an intentional decision that he is making to be solo. Obviously, this changes later, but not really, because
he doesn't see anyone as his equal, and typically you see your friends as your equals.
They view themselves as his friend.
Yeah.
He does not view them as his friend. So, difference of verbiage there. Dumbledore also notes that clearly he liked to collect trophies, and says this will be an important detail going forward. But we'll get there later.
I just... the amount of red flags is so astonishing to me, and what I'm trying to figure out is, like, why did Dumbledore still say, like, yeah, come on, come to Hogwarts? Like, I don't understand it. Like, you see all this, and you see that he's, like, a terrible person, even for an 11-year-old, but, like,
Julie,
and you're still like, come on, let's go. And also, another thing. I'm trying to understand how the Ministry of Magic, like, monitors underage magic, because obviously once you start school, if you do any type of magic, They're like, whoa, 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 nope, nope,
Yeah.
nope. Even if you're in your own home where there's no, like, muggles around.
Yeah.
But...
even when you're in your own magical household.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But for some reason, when you're under the age of 11, they're like, oh, huh. You just,
Levitated a rabbit to,
Yeah.
like, hang itself? Yeah.
whatever, that's fine. Wouldn't you think you would track that for the things that are more, like,
Devious?
out there?
Yeah.
Not only devious, but, like, the stuff that's, like, imagine if you're, like, a muggle born and, you know, you trip down a flight of stairs and instead of hurting yourself, you, like, bounce like a basketball or something. Like, that's when your magic's activated.
But what if a muggle-born... Like, what if... I mean, I guess Harry essentially acts as a muggle-born growing up in an all-muggle household. Like, that incident with Aunt Marge, like, that's a problem.
And I mean, like, granted, that was when he was, like, in school. But, like, if that happened
Pre-11,
before he started...
you still got to send people to go fix that.
Yeah, and you just go like, oh, hey, we weren't going to tell you for another 3 years, but, you're a wizard. Like,
Right,
what?
right.
Do they just not care until they're 11? No one monitored this and was like, wow, this magic is, like, dark stuff happening.
Yeah.
They're just like, kids will be kids. It's fine.
Well, here's the thing, Julie. We've documented well on this podcast that in the 1990s, where this series takes place, there's clearly no therapy, no mental health.
No OSHA.
There's no nothing. So if there's nothing in the 1990s, there surely isn't anything in the 30s or 40s. So they're
That's why the asylums were so full.
Probably.
Because people would see all of these young underage witches and wizards performing magic because they didn't know they were magic, and they'd be like, I saw a boy levitate. And they'd go, oh, sure you did, Thomas. Come see the nice men in white coats.
Yes. Like, their infrastructure for this is so incredibly poor that it is outstanding, really. I don't know. The Ministry of Magic should be on the hook here for establishing some sort of,
especially
like...
since, like, Dumbledore points out that Tom Riddle had a strong amount of power and control over his power at such a young age. Wouldn't you think that the Ministry would be like, hold on, this isn't like a level, like, 3 power. This is like a level 7 power. Or what, I don't know. Like, however it's the level of magic is measured, wouldn't you think that they'd see that coming from a kid and be like, hi, you come here.
Or it registers as like, oh, this is clearly accidental. Like, this can be clearly marked off as accidental. Mm-hmm. But some of this stuff is like, okay, maybe one time, maybe accidental. He got angry or whatever. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Like, okay.
The wizarding world causes a lot of its own problems.
Kinda. A little bit.
Anyway.
So at the very end of this chapter, Harry recognizes that the mouth organ isn't there. He was expecting to see one of the trinkets from Tom Riddle's room, and he also noticed that the ring wasn't there either. And Dumbledore just goes, the mouth organ was only ever just a mouth organ. Which is a curious line. Which then begs to presume the ring, not a ring? Right? Okay. That's what I would get from it in this. The mouth organ was only ever just a mouth organ. Interesting.
It's a very Dumbledore thing to say.
It's such a Dumbledore thing where it just begs 10 more questions and then he dismisses you.
Yeah. Anyway, it's dark outside. Goodbye, Harry.
Yep. See you later. Anyway. And we will see all of you later on the spoiler section after this break sound. So enjoy the wonderful Ron Lavender break sound that Hermione loves so much, and we'll be back after that. Before we get to our break sound, I'd like to acknowledge our friend Andy, who helps us produce our intros and our break sounds. If you want to hear more of Andy's work and like Formula One racing, check out the Outlap F1 podcast. It's your one-stop shop for Formula One news, insights, race previews, and reviews. You can find them wherever you listen to podcasts, and they even have a YouTube page. So check out Andy, Cody, John, James, and Deanna, and join them on the Outlet.
Where is he? Where's my 1-1?
All right, so we are back with the spoiler section of Chapter 13, The Secret Riddle. And I just wanted to kind of pick up with that whole mouth organ, Voldy collecting trophies line. I know that as we get into the later part of this book and into all of Book 7, you're trying to count Horcruxes and what might be Horcruxes and what might even factor in later to this whole series. I know a lot of people went back to literally this chapter and the box of the silver thimble and the yo-yo and the mouth organ. And it obviously didn't turn out that way. It ends up being, the cave, and it's just the locket being stored there. So the cave does play a role.
Yeah.
So the idea that, Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop do play a role in this, because whatever happened to them in that cave
That's what I'm saying. What happened?
was so meaningful to Voldy that he ends up storing a Horcrux there, a part of his soul in that cave. Wow. Also, what happened to Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop after this? Did they end up in the asylum later, or poor them? Oh my gosh. But I know some people were thinking ooh, does the box of trinkets mean something? No, they're just I guess symbols of Horcruxes are a thing.
But it also, and that's the thing, is that it shows that he kind of had the predisposition, I guess, to collect trinkets that may or may not be relevant or meaningful.
I honestly, reading the last couple of lines of that chapter and that whole mouth organ is just only ever a mouth organ line, I'm like, okay, JK, you're kind of giving away the whole thing here. Wow, you kind of hit the nose right there.
Well, I feel like it's one of those where, because of how Dumbledore speaks regularly, you don't read into that of what could that mean, until you're reading the second time and you're like, oh, wow, you weren't speaking in riddles, pun not intended.
I will give her
that
this.
one.
You could, having read this book fully, come back to that line and be like, okay, clearly the ring is a Horcrux or whatever. Yeah. But I will give her the curveball of it also being the Hallow. That I guess was a curveball on the ring, because it's not one thing; it's actually two things.
True.
But
True.
So there's that. But let's get to the. I just took note of Albus calling Voldy the most dangerous dark wizard ever, and I'm like, that's a compliment. Mm-hmm. I guess Voldy would take it as a compliment. But you're talking about a wizard that's also dealt with Grindelwald, and I'm just gonna. We don't really get a lot of Grindelwald other than he was super, super powerful.
You don't even really hear a lot about what he did in his Reign of Terror, just that there was a Reign of Terror.
Until you get to the Fantastic Beast movies.
Yeah.
Which we are in spoilers, so we're going to get spoilers for that as well, where you get a little bit of what Grindelwald was really good at. Mm-hmm. And I'm just saying, and maybe it's the Mads Mikkelsen effect, because I really liked his portrayal of Grindelwald, but that was really sinister. He could do a lot of things mentally and emotionally to you. He can sway you just by his voice. He can.
To be fair, so can Tom Riddle.
He can. That's true. I don't know. I guess my interpretation of it is Tom Riddle's just really charming.
Yeah.
The impression I get from Grindelwald is there's a power behind it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's just the sensation I get. He's almost piercing you with his voice. He doesn't have to use a wand. And then there's this one scene where Grindelwald takes a memory from someone and then just destroys the memory, so it just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Which is a cruelty beyond measure. And I'm just I get Voldy's done some terrible things, but is he more dangerous than Grindelwald, or is Albus just blinded because he had an affection for Grindelwald that maybe blinds him to some of the atrocities that Grindelwald was doing?
Well, but Voldemort essentially resurrected, in a sense. He has all the Horcruxes, and what needs to be done to make a Horcrux is also awful and terrible, and splitting your soul that many times, I can see why you'd say that he's the most dangerous, because for Voldemort, there's nothing that he wouldn't do.
I guess Voldy is also pushing the boundaries of magic maybe more than Grindelwald might have been.
Like, I think Grindelwald is more, like, just brute power, whereas Voldemort is more, I don't know, diabolical power, and it's the, like, he has a way of still creeping back and still striking fear. And Voldemort hasn't technically been defeated yet.
I still have questions on, like, the first Wizarding War with Voldy. What his scope was. Because, again, the only comparison I really have is the Fantastic Beasts movies. But Grindelwald was going to literally be the leader of the world. Like, that was his ultimate goal, was to control the whole planet. And Voldy seems to be relatively localized into just the UK area, which I know can't be true, but it just reads that way.
Yeah, I think it only reads that way because in the books we're really only focused on the UK. Whereas in the Fantastic Beasts movies, like, you also see the US. So I think, like, that gave a more, like, broad scope of the world. It's like in Goblet of Fire, where all of a sudden you're like, wait, there's other wizarding schools?
Right.
Wait, there's wizards in other countries, guys? Wow, cool!
Yeah.
And I think to knock J.K. Rowling a little bit, one thing that she didn't do as well in the series was show that it is a true wizarding world, not... It's in the UK and, I don't know, maybe a couple other places.
Yeah.
And so I think that might also be why Voldemort seems more localized.
Yeah. I wonder if Albus is neglecting some of Grindelwald's worst characteristics because he has that soft spot for him.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I know you had a lot on Voldy.
Yeah, well, so back to my red flags. Wave them high.
Do you have enough hands? Do you need, like, hands and toes to count all of these, like, red flags?
I mean, I don't even think that's enough. Like, get me an old school, like, abacus or something.
Yeah. You're going to need a calculator to count all these up.
But how many times have we seen, like, not even just in, like, this memory, but by the end of the series, how many times do we see things that, like, Dumbledore could have stopped it all? None of it had to happen. You're seeing that he's torturing people. He has a massive amount of power. You have experience with Grindelwald. And so it's not like you're going into this like, oh, well, he's just a troubled kid. Like, you know exactly what Tom Riddle could turn into. And you're just sitting there seeing all these red flags, and there is no part of you that goes, huh.
So I think the natural question for you then is, what do you want him to do? Because you get into this, like, dynamic. I know this is like this is a common debate, but it's like Marvel pulled it up in the Endgame. I'm pulling Star Wars. I'm pulling Marvel.
I know we have a lot of cross references.
But in Endgame, they mention, like, do we go back in time and kill baby Thanos? Like, do you go, like, if Dumbledore goes to this orphanage, meets Tom Riddle for the first time, goes, oh, this kid's a problem. I'll end this now. And kills him?
No, I'm not even saying that he kills him. Like, why not just, you tell him about the school, and then once you get all the information, like, erase his memory about the school. He never finds it. He never knows that he actually has magical ability. Like, heck, he's Albus Dumbledore. Erase his memory of having magic. I'm sure that it would come back later, but, like, why wouldn't you sit there as a, like, we'll call him a reformed villain at this point. Dumbledore, we're calling the reformed villain.
Ooh, interesting. Okay. I was like, when does Voldy get...
No. Like, when you've been that close to Grindelwald and the Hollows and, like, ultimate power, like, and you see Tom Riddle, like, Dumbledore, you stopped. You realized when you had gone too far. And you're now seeing someone at the early stages of, you know, going completely off the rails downhill, and you sit there and go, yeah, it'll be fine. I'll just, you know, keep an eye on him. And I mean, we see a lot of Albus's, like, arrogance throughout the books. But I just feel like this one in particular, that it's like there are so many red flags that, like, I don't know how this memory wasn't just glaring in red. And for him to sit there and see all of that with everything that he experienced in the past, and to just go, well, you know, I'll just be sure to keep an eye on him at school. It'll be fine. And then you get to when he opens the Chamber of Secrets. Yeah. And you already know he's a parcel tongue. And you just go, well, I mean, they said it was Hagrid.
Now I'll keep a closer eye on him.
I'll keep a closer eye on him. And it's like, it just keeps happening again and again and again. And there are so many times throughout the whole series that, like, especially now when it's like, you know how everything ends, that it's like...
Even if you don't want to do it yourself, even if you're like, I don't want to punish this kid because I think he can turn it around.
Yeah.
Okay. But then you got to go to the Ministry of Magic and be like, hey, this kid's a problem. Like, I think this kid, like, you want to blame Hagrid for opening the Chamber of Secrets. I think it was this kid because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, instead you just went, well, they blamed Hagrid and now the killings have stopped, so I'll just watch him. He'll get better, right?
Yeah.
And it just keeps happening again and again. And he hears the prophecy and he just goes, I should keep an eye on that prophecy thing.
Oh, at that point, Voldy's already like,
well, I know, but I'm just saying, like, there's just so... there are so many instances where Dumbledore could have stopped it all. And he just went, you know what? Let me grab my popcorn and see how this plays out.
I want to come up with a poll so bad about, like, what should Dumbledore do in this, like...
Like, I'm not saying that he should have, like, offed Tom Riddle, but, like, you're telling me there isn't some type of memory charm that he could have, like, erased magic or erased the memory of magic, or you're telling me that there's not some type of potion that's super, super hard to make that, like, zaps someone of their powers?
Well, I mean, you can't give him the excuse of this is an unprecedented situation because, literally, Grindelwald. So you can't make that excuse for Dumbledore. Mm-hmm. You look at this chapter, and I get not wanting to necessarily punish a kid for future potential problems that might or might not happen. But at the same time, he's already shown a prevalence towards, maybe even a preference towards violent acts or abusive acts, and you don't really do anything to stunt that growth or development of those tendencies.
Yeah, and I just...
But again, I go back to the Wizarding world as a whole. There's no real infrastructure there at all to deal with mental or social issues.
But at this point, when you see this much happening, like, I mean, it's a harsh punishment, but, like, put him in Azkaban for a month, a week, a day. I don't know if it would have affected him.
I don't know that it would have even affected him.
That he really had, like, happiness, but, like,
he didn't have happiness and he didn't have remorse either. He was fine doing it. I feel like
this book really started, like, the decline of my view on Dumbledore, because there's just so many things where it's like, not only could you have prevented so much with, like, Voldemort, but, like, and I get it, like, J.K. Rowling needed to write 7 books, so, like, you needed to kind of have the, like, little plot points that help you to write 7 books, but, like, we could have ended Voldemort coming back years ago at this point if Dumbledore had been like, hey, Harry, let me actually tell you about your life and how I think you're connected to Voldemort and what is eventually going to one day happen. Or the beginning of this book, like, you know, you're spacing out your lessons with Harry, which Harry, like, complains about, but it's like, you're telling him all this without any context. You're like, okay, let's check out this memory, but pay close attention, because 2 months from now, when we have our next lesson, it'll be important. Like, just tell everyone. Like, I'm not even saying lay out your entire plan, because I get it. Like, you don't actually know who to trust or who can be, like, broken or whatever, but, like, everything would have been so much easier and simpler if Dumbledore just, like, confided in Harry. Or even at this point in book 6 of telling Harry, like, hey, this is what we're after. We're going, you know what? We're going to lock ourselves in the headmaster's office for a week and run through all these memories, and I'm going to explain what the heck we're actually doing here. Instead of spending the better half of a year, like, tiptoeing up to it and then being like, oh yeah, by the way, there's Horcruxes, probably 7.
For a man that's so incredibly smart and wise, which I think no one can deny that he is, but like Harry says sometimes, even Dumbledore admits he makes mistakes. And then Dumbledore himself said, I do make mistakes, and because I'm so smart and wise, when I do make a mistake, it tends to be a pretty big mistake. And he seems to be not just making a mistake, but the only thing he seems to actually be mistaken on ever is children. He put his trust in Grindelwald when he was of a young age. Mm-hmm. He missed the boat on Tom Riddle, and he missed the boat on when to bring Harry into the fold in what is essentially his life.
Why is he a headmaster at the school?
I don't
He's
know.
clearly not, like, he's so good with people, but terrible with understanding children. And, like, it's so infuriating that, like, I was even thinking about it with, in terms of, obviously, Harry is going to tell Ron and Hermione, and Dumbledore knows that that conversation is happening. So, like, why not cut to the chase? Have Ron and Hermione there. I get not taking them, like, into the cave or actually searching for Horcruxes, but going through the memories, don't you think that would be helpful for, like, Hermione to see? Because Hermione is smart as heck. She might see something.
So now you're banking on Harry telling her a full, accurate account of what you just went through.
Like, at that point, you might as well have Harry pull out his memory and then have Ron and Hermione watch it. Like, come on. I think
Here's my conflicted comment that I'm about to throw out there is I want to say it's because Albus is an educator, his life is devoted to children. Granted, I don't know that that's the path that he originally wanted. His path was towards power originally.
Yeah.
And he said, I can't do that because that doesn't look good on me.
Yeah.
So he goes this path instead, which is fine. So he dedicates his life to educating children and the business, I suppose, of children. But that's fine and good. Here's my conflicting thing is, and I'm putting the real world into this fictional world that we have, and, you know, it is what it is, but real world teachers do have to recognize social issues. They have to recognize mental issues. And granted, most of this happens earlier in the process. Yeah. I've known some kindergarten teachers that get very stressed out over being essentially able to diagnose, like, okay, this kid has ADD. This kid needs a little help. This kid has a speech issue. This kid has a hearing issue. Like, we need to start steering these children towards other educational paths based on their needs. And I get that I'm putting real world into this wizarding world. And as I've said multiple times already, the wizarding world just doesn't have that.
Yeah.
They just don't have that. It's a one-size-fits-all, which is a terrible way to do education.
Yeah, well, and it's like, I also understand that, like, obviously Hogwarts, you pretty much go from child to adult while you're there. But it's like, I feel like Dumbledore handles Harry with these kid gloves, and then all of a sudden, like, he realizes that Voldemort's next move is killing Dumbledore, and he's like, I guess I should probably start telling Harry things. And instead of being like, well, it could happen tomorrow. Actually, just kidding. Dumbledore went, nothing uneventful happens before the end of the school year, so I've got until the end of the year.
He was afraid of it. So here's the thing. So this is just a side note that I'm just putting together now. But I'm assuming he suspects Tom Riddle of opening the Chamber of Secrets when he was at school. Not necessarily afraid of Tom Riddle at that point, but watches him more closely.
Yeah.
He is fearful of Harry in the 5th year. He avoids Harry because of Voldy's influence upon him. But still, he avoids Harry specifically and was like, ooh, Harry might be a problem. I can't be near that.
Yeah.
Which is a mistake. But I'm like, I feel like his biggest mistakes tend to be with the kids that are the most in need of his like actual help and guidance.
Yes.
I don't know. Anyway, do you have anything else?
No, I've finished my rant about all the red flags. So if there's anything to wrap up the whole chapter, it's red flag, red flag, red flag.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Everyone gets a red flag.
We went pretty aggressively at Dumbledore, maybe more aggressively than Tom Riddle did in this chapter. I'm not sure.
Probably. Hey, look at me. I'm attacking Dumbledore instead of Harry today.
Fair enough.
Wow. This is like a revolutionary episode, Dan.
Hey, Harry did a great job of recognizing, like, oh, I expected to see the mouth organ here. Like, putting that together.
Yeah, look at that. We're agreeing.
I know.
I haven't attacked Harry. Well, I did a little bit in the beginning, but not that bad.
Not that bad. It's okay. Julie's coming back again next week, so we'll get into an argument then.
Yeah. I'm sure I'll have mean things to say about Harry then. It's fine.
Probably. Thank you all for listening. Really appreciate all of the support you all give us as listeners from around the world. We really appreciate that support as well. And how you can support this podcast is A, by listening, B, by giving us a 5-star review on Spotify. That helps us a lot. Any comments that you have on what we've been discussing, put it on Spotify, put it on our Twitter at HogwartsAPod, and our Instagram also at HogwartsAPod, and we'll get all of that and we'll shout you out as we go. There's also a support the podcast link wherever you're hearing this that leads you to a financial donation, which really helps us out because we put in a lot of time and a lot of effort. We're recording this on a day where we're doing a mass recording. We're recording quite a few episodes today, so it's a lot of time and a lot of effort. But we're happy to do it because we love talking Harry Potter. If you couldn't get that from our impassioned views.
From me shouting a lot.
Yeah. But thank you all for listening, and we will be back next week with Chapter 14, Felix Felicis.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to Hogwarts, a podcast. If you like what you've heard, please click the subscribe button on your preferred podcasting app and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at HogwartsAPod.